Welcome back. So we're going to spend some time talking about the justifiable ask. This is a super important component not only of your time in residence, but it'll be of similar critical importance to your talking to your impact investor. So the goals of this submodule is to understand how the investors analyze funding requests and to make sure you develop your enterprise's investment requirements that are credible to your impact investor. So this is, we've taken it from our friends from Tonic. This is a typical investment process, and really why alignment matters. So Tonic says that they had more than 500 investment opportunities in 2015. They go through a screening process of which 107 of those were actually analyzed. And of the 107, there were only 15 organizations that were funded over that same period of time. So that reduction from 515 says, as a social entrepreneur, you may waste a ton of time chasing dollars that are simply not available to you. What's important is to align yourselves with the type of investors who have similar sorts of regional and sector interest, have the type of capital that's needed for your organization, and the amounts that they are typically investing in, so that you don't waste your time or their time and get to a point where you're getting funding that you need in as efficient way as possible. Now, one way to look at it is that you have impact. And your impact is something that correlated along a continuum of breadth and depth. And simplistically, you may say, well, I improve lives, and so I need lots and lots of customers to be able to justify investment. And this could be things like a cleaner water and other solar lanterns and other kinds of things like that. It could be that you transform lives, meaning that you're actually fundamentally changing the way that people are doing things. And this could have there's a lot of agricultural stuff here, and education and so on, where you're taking and fundamentally changing the way people do things and improving their situation. Or it could be that you save lives, and this is healthcare and other kinds of things. And again, healthcare is not the sort of organization for a social enterprise that's easy to scale, so the investors are going to expect fewer beneficiaries, whereas improving lives are easier to scale, and they're going to expect a lot more beneficial outcomes. When you look at it from the opposite point of view, that is from the investor's point of view, there's some that are looking for, again, a range, a continuum, and some that are looking for an economic return, that is 5 to 20% internal rate of return. Some that are simply looking to recycle their capital. They're happy to give you an investment, let you do great things, but they want their money back so they can redo it again. And there's some who are simply interested in the impact, and that they're not expecting any return, or concessionary returns, if you will. So you're going to see there's a spectrum of these: the impact-only investors, impact-first investors, and financial-first investors. And this is a very rough framework. It isn't intended to allow you to be able to pinpoint where you are, just to sort of say, in gross terms, approximately what type of investor is going to be interested in your solution and when. Now back to our justifiable ask. The four components again is the funding amount, the type of capital, the use of those funds, and the investor return. And we're going to dive into each one of these independently. So the funding amount then is enough money to implement your next phase of your enterprise. Let's say, for example, to get the cash flow neutral, or to get that pilot production project built. They want to generally identify the amount correlated to your growth plan and your strategic initiatives, typically bounded by time and clear expected outcomes. So it could be a range, let's say in this, for example, 250 to 500K, but make sure if you only raise 250, what the outcomes will be, which will be different than if you raise 500,000. Now, again, our cumulative net cash flow you shouldn't expect that the current investors, your new investors, are going to fund the entire amount. They're going to fund things that allow you to get from where you are today to some meaningful outcome. But they want to know what the total requirement for cash is going to be, because they want to understand if you can get to the finish line, if you will, if you can get to a sustainable organic growth. So they may only fund a portion of it, but they're looking for how much additional capital is going to be required to get you to where you want to be. Type of capital. So there's a long list here, and this is only a partial list, starting with donations and grants, things where the investors are typically unrestricted or looking for specific outcomes. They care about impact. They're probably asking for impact metrics and so on, but it's all focused on impact. Soft loans is a way of getting access to capital from an impact first type investor who will then look to see that there's payment back, that they're going to give you some flexibility in how much and when. Traditional loans are usually used by organizations that are in later stages of development, where it's asset backed, or it's a working capital line of credit, or in some other way it's collateralized or guaranteed. Interestingly, there's the variable payment obligations, or the VPOs. So this is an investment that goes in, and really the repayment begins when you're capable of repaying the loan. And that might be tied to your revenue, or to your margins, or to your internal cash flow based upon the negotiation with the impact investor. But it gives you the runway that you need, but still assures the impact investor that repayment will be made at some time in the future. Convertible debt is a pretty common thing we see in impact investing. That is, I give you a loan today, you begin to pay things back, but I have the right to convert that to equity at some point in time. And of course, equity itself, typically for larger investors, later scale, growth capital, and they're looking for a way of a return on that equity that could be an exit, like initial public offering or a merger, or it could be a series of dividends or other ways that you pay those investors back. Now, when you're thinking about your cash flow, you're thinking about aligning yourself with investors, that the early stage investors, these people are highly risk tolerant. They know that it's early, and they may just think that your solution is the best that they've seen, and are willing to get to fund you and to get your momentum started. But they're probably looking at smaller investment amounts, and they're clearly patient capital because they know it's going to take a long time to get to be a position to be repaid. Mid-stage, these are kind of a mix of capital. We call it blended capital. So it could be a combination of donations and debt, and perhaps some variable payment obligations, those types of things. What they want is some sort of asset-backed or a guarantee, so it protects their downside. So again, they're certainly willing to be thinking about the impact first, but they also want to protect their investment in some form. Your later stage organizations, they're growth capital. You've already proven your business model works, that the beneficiaries are, the products and services are serving them well. There's lots of opportunity to grow. You'll get a larger investment here, and they're looking for an economic return. So again, depending upon where you are, this, should we say, alignment, helps you try to make a determination who are the best impact investors. And by the way, the impact investors are usually pretty clear in their websites and in the organizations that are in their portfolio about what type of investment they prefer, what region, what sector, the amount of money that they invest. So they're usually pretty clear, and I would encourage you to do some diligence on your investor before you do a whole lot of work. Now, we've talked about the blended capital a couple of different times here, and I wanted to just sort of step into this, give you just a little bit of more detail. So blended capital then is a combination of investment types. So grants or donations, debts, variable payment obligation, convertible debt, those kinds of things. Kind of a mixture of them. And the investors like it because it mitigates their risk. That is, there's multiple people who are investing simultaneously and they're not taking on the entire risk. There's more capital in reserve, so if in fact it takes you longer to be able to achieve your goals, there's more capital they can call upon. And if they're finance first and an equity investor, there's less dilution, meaning that their ownership percentage is maintained. Now the entrepreneurs like it as well. Why? Because often you get really patient capital to be participating here. And the debt that comes in during that critical time when you're converting from burn to cash flow positive, you get things like working capital lines of credits or capital leases or asset-backed loans and things like that, which gives you the flexibility to not have to give ownership of your company away to raise capital, but you've got the needs that you have that are exactly tied to your operational outcome. And it gives you access typically to larger funders. There's a great article by Catherine Cheney at DevEx, and she looks at this thing from a 360-degree view. So what she says is, with blended capital approach, entrepreneurs can combine grants and investments, filling the gap that exists between philanthropy and public funding and traditional investment. And that's exactly right. And so you saw in Carbon Roots, there was a blended capital capability. And then another GSBI alumni company called Pharmaline is highlighted in the DevEx articles. There's a link there to that DevEx article, and I would encourage you to consider blended capital and use that as sort of a way to think about it. So here's a summary. Types of capital: impact only, impact first, financial first. Again, these are sort of gross level categorizations, so you may fall somewhere in between. But impact only, they're looking, the capital may not even be returns. They're typically donations and grants. They're looking for efficiency and impact metrics, and the ability for you to be able to serve the needs of your customers and beneficiaries. Impact first generally recycles, right? So if I give you $100,000, you serve the needs of 1 million people, you give me $100,000 back, I'm happy, right? This is program-related investments, soft loans, VPOs, those kinds of things. They're looking primarily at cash flow to make sure that they're going to be able to get their money back. And again, metrics-wise, from an impact perspective, SDGs and IRIS metrics. Finance first, this is, they want returns, financial returns, 5 to 20% internal rate of return. Typically, they're going to do equity or debt. They're looking for the margins per beneficiary outcome to be improving over time. They may or may not care about impact metrics at all, and their metrics are going to be things like financial metrics like internal rates of return, return on investment or capital, and discounted cash flow. So for you, as you think of your types of investments, think about where do I fit categorically, and then what types of investments am I looking for, and what way do I communicate that value to that type of investor. Use of funds. So this goes right back to your growth plan. Your use of funds should correlate to your growth plan and your strategic initiatives. So scalability, your baseline business, but also your strategic initiatives which improve your business, accelerate your growth, and extend the breadth and depth of your impact. So it's the combination of a scalable business, the strategic initiatives, which equals to your growth plan, and fundamentally what you're looking at the use of funds is funding of your growth plan, which includes all of these elements. Now, I would also suggest that you tie your business and impact models to the use of funds. So in the case of Carbon Roots, they were improving their gross margins. So they were improving their operational metrics. And they were improving their production output, meaning the amount of tonnage that they could provide in any particular day was going up significantly. And by doing that, it was also improving their impact outcomes, which included the income that we're providing, and the reduction of the deforestation, which was part of it. So again, you've worked hard to select those operational, business, and impact metrics. Well, now let's correlate them to the use of funds, and again, that'll raise the credibility with you and your impact investor. Now, the return to investor, for the social impact, you want to document your impact to date. That's very important. And then use your financial projection to also project your future impact. Whatever whatever impact metrics you're choosing, what does it look like over time? For your financial return, for grants, is how will the enterprise be strengthened and the cost per beneficiary go down? For debt, it's looking at how repayment was going to be made, so make sure that's within your cash flow projection, and how that gets you to your next stage of growth. And for equity, you'll want to update your cap table and look for and include any additional rounds that are required, meaning additional funding events that are required, and towards an eventual exit for that equity or that financial first investor. Now, the financial first investor is a little bit different type of animal. So what they want is these metrics: cumulative net cash flow, of course, internal rates of return, return on investment, or equity. And these are important. But this also raises the question of valuation. And so let me just take a couple of seconds here to talk about valuation. And I would suggest that you spend time with your mentors and other people to make a determination if you're looking at convertible debt and or an equity round, to consider what valuation is appropriate and fair. Now, as a word of caution, valuation is highly subjective, meaning it could come out in a number of different places. Part of it is that they're managing a portfolio, and that portfolio wants to yield a result. And you're just one component of that. So your, should we say, portion of the outcome of the portfolio may weigh into what the valuation they're willing to provide is. Another is that the investor's expertise. So if this is something that's they're used to, they have a great deal of knowledge, they can bring a lot of their network to bear, it looks like it's really close to aligned with their own particular motivation, that will help you as well. If it's something far afield that they've never invested in, it's unlikely that they're going to make a switch and come back and look at this. So it's their expertise, it's their resources, it's their time that's going to be a consideration for them. Then there's the ownership and control. Typically, an equity investor is going to look for a reasonable amount of ownership in the organization. And this ranges from anywhere from as low as 10 to as high as 40. And so there's a whole range of outcomes that are in there. But be sensitive to the fact that what their ownership percentage wants to be, because that's how they're going to be thinking about it. Now, there's a couple of tools that you can use to sort of help you think like an impact investor who's going to be looking at valuation. One is the discounted cash flow. It's fundamental. So there's a really good article, Investopedia. You can cut and paste that guy, and it walks you through step by step to make a determination, not only to understand what the components of the calculation are, but actually to go back in and plug in your own information and come out what the evaluation would be using this technique. There's also a valuation tool on Juice Analytics that's okay. I mean, it's again, all these things are highly subjective. So it's one other way for you to kind of have a tool that you can play with to sort of set your own expectations and help you think like your impact investors think. Now, there's terminology. So financial first investors have their own language, and you need to be able to understand their languages to communicate with a high bandwidth. And Investopedia has a great section on the definition of these terms, but they're not correlated necessarily to impact investors. So the things I think are important, at least, is that there's a difference between the term sheet and the definitive agreement. The term sheet outlines the terms and conditions, the amount of money, the type of capital, the rights and preferences, all those other kinds of things. Definitive agreement is the fundamental contract, and then the term sheet might be a page or two. Definitive agreement is probably 20 to 50 pages. For equity investors, they may be looking for preferred stock. So you'll hear people say Series A preferred or Series B preferred. And what the preferences are things like participation, which means they have the right to participate in any subsequent round of funding. The first right of refusal, meaning if there is somebody who internally who is selling, they have the right to be able to purchase those shares. Anti-dilution protection, board seats, voting rights, information rights. This is all complicated stuff. You're going to need a lawyer to sort through it, but be clear that you understand, at least in general, what people are talking about at that level. Debt funding, convertible debt is going to have something called a conversion rate discount. That is, if they choose to convert, they will get that conversion rate at a discount. Typically 20%, could be higher. Caps. A cap means that they will never have to pay more than a prescribed amount per share. And they're going to insist upon, almost assuredly, information and approval rights on how you spend your capital. Other sorts of things like traditional debts or asset-based or working capital, things like interest rates, the term, the security, if there's any security, financial covenants. That is, you can't fall below a certain liquidity level. Information rights, conditional draws, and so on. There's a variety of different things. And again, if you're thinking about debt instruments, go look at an Investopedia and do some real research on what it is that you can expect from your impact investors. VPOs, the variable payment obligations. Again, what are they asking for? Is it royalty-based, based upon your revenue or your margins? Or is it a demand dividend, meaning they're going to have a lump payment at the end of a prescribed period of time? Again, this is, tools for you to be able to have so that when you're communicating with the impact investor, you're doing it at a high bandwidth with a high degree of credibility. So the output here is create your justifiable ask. That's the amount, the type of capital, the use of capital, your investor return, whether it's economic or impact or both. And then update your business plan slide deck so that you have all of that available for in-residence, but also for your impact investors. Thanks very much. We'll be back shortly.